All right, we'll declare our meeting open at 10:14. All councillors are in attendance. There are no apologies. Just start with the acknowledgement of country. Ipswich City Council respectfully acknowledges the traditional owners as custodians of the land upon which we meet. We pay our respect to their elders past, present and emerging as the keepers of the traditions, cultures and stories of a proud people. Now, we haven't had too much of a break this morning, so I'd like to move for a 20-minute adjournment before we really get stuck into a pretty big agenda. That doesn't need a seconder. It doesn't need one, but thank you, Mayor. I'll put the matter to the vote. Those in favour? That's unanimous and carried. We'll be back in 20 minutes at 10:35. Thank you, Deputy Chair, for keeping time. A valued member of this committee as always.
Thank you, Chair.
All right, well, we've got 3 councillors and the chair, so we can continue on. The first item on today's agenda is the confirmation of minutes of the Governance and Transparency Committee of 5 May 2022. Do any committee members wish to move that? Moved by Councillor Milligan, seconded by Councillor Doyle. Any discussion on those minutes this morning from the committee? There being no discussion, I'll put that to the vote. Those in favour of adopting? That's unanimous and carried. Our first officer's report today is the annual review of delegations to the Chief Executive Officer. Do any members of the committee have questions pertaining to this matter? All right, there being no questions, I'll seek a mover from the floor. Councillor Milligan, seconded by Councillor Doyle. Any discussion this morning? There being no discussion, I will put the matter to the vote. Those in favour? That's unanimous and carried. Item 3 today is the discontinuation of discounted dog registration classifications for obedience-trained dogs, Dogs Queensland members and farm dogs. There's some councillors that we have on the council, but not indeed the committee, so I thought that perhaps we could refer this to the council meeting. I'm happy to have some discussion on it this morning, but...
If I may, Chair, I would like for us to discuss it today, if that's okay.
Yeah, I'm happy with that. I just wanted to raise to the committee that Councillor Fechner and Ireland have previously discussed the matter for me, so rather than adopting a... We'll see how the discussion goes, but my initial thoughts are rather than adopting a recommendation for the council, we take it to the council for the council to decide, given that those 2 councillors previously indicated some input. Would you like to speak to the relevant officer this morning, Mayor?
No.
All right, well, I'll seek a mover then.
I guess we're being asked for an option, and my preference is for option 3. So I know it says the report be received and noted.
Moved by Councillor Jonick. We'll have a seconder before we discuss the matter. Seconded by Councillor Kunzelman. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, Chair. I know that this is looking for us to... There's 3 options put to us, and I guess I'll put forward that I prefer option 3, which is to reinstate the classification. There's about 299 dogs that were impacted by losing this discount. And, you know, these are people who have membership with Dogs Queensland. They're responsible dog owners. Some of them are breeders, and they're very proud of what they do. So that's where my mind is setting it at this stage. I appreciate that this will probably go to ordinary council meeting for that final decision, but that's where my mind is at.
Thank you, Mayor. Any further discussion this morning? All right, well then I'll seek the advice of the committee here. I've previously said what I think, that we can pull it out next week, but there's a number of options.
I'm happy for it to go straight to the ordinary, because there are a number of other councillors who have views on this. So.
Thank you, Councillor Doyle. It's a bit of a matter of style rather than substance. If we move it to the council meeting, it'll arise as business arising, and it'll be ready at the top of the meeting to be discussed for the full council. Save us the procedural runaround to extract it from the committee report. So that's why I recommend that action. So I'll move that the report be referred to the ordinary council meeting on 30 June, I think it is. Are you okay with that, Kate and Nicole, the mover and seconder? Yes. All right.
Yes, that's okay for me.
Yep. So that was seconded by Councillor Doyle, was it? Thank you, Councillor Doyle. Any discussion on what I've moved there this morning? All right, I will put that to the vote. Those in favour? That's unanimous and carried. Our next item today is the procurement matter, Human Resource Information System, HRIS, Deloitte Consulting, pretty substantial contract. Any questions this morning of the relevant officers? Mayor Harding?
From a procurement perspective, please, Chair.
Richard White, Manager of Procurement.
Through the chair, Mr. White, thank you for this report. It is a significant amount of money. How do we know that our approach to the market is giving us best value for money?
I'm sorry, I've just going to fully reacquaint myself because I've been juggling a couple of different thought processes in my head. This one is part of the iVolve prospectus, but we'll be including in market sounding in the coming months, which we'll be bringing to council as we've discussed in the last few weeks as part of the EOI that we'll approach. We have notified the market we'll be taking this out. I believe this one was done as a competitive, but I do have 3 today, and I'm just trying to remind myself when we did that.
It looks like there was no approach to the market.
So on 23rd of May 2017, following a tender process, so the last competitive tender we took for this was 5 years ago. At that time, we would have assessed value for money against a competitive open market. Considering the position we're in right now, leading into a process where we will be approaching the market in the next 6 months, the likelihood that we should retest the market and perhaps predispose that more complex EOI process that would be considering our entire gamut of products as a holistic approach, I would support, and why we were supporting continuing this contract in the short term with year-on-year contracts until we have a full test of the market in the next 6 months.
So that's the reason for going sole source and just extending it. How do we know during the negotiations that we actually got the best deal?
At the time, in 2017.
No, now.
Now?
So this is a contract extension. How did the contract extension negotiations go?
So at the time, right now when we're making these contract negotiations, how do we drive the best value for money? It's a very interesting proposition because we know we're sole sourcing and they know we're sole sourcing and they know that we're approaching the market. I would say I would trust my officers have done the appropriate negotiations to get the best deal we can get. However, I can come back with how that went and what the back and forth has been as a take on notice, if you allow.
So does that mean we've done negotiations? We're not sure exactly of the price, but we think it's around this amount?
They're very round figures. I would say that we require this execution by September. I would say that they are seeking your approval at the moment to engage in direct negotiation, and that is why we have round figures. The September date would be the date that we would be renewing the actual contract. So generally in these approaches, we're seeking your advice to sole source with a round figure about what we're looking at annually at the moment, and then we will firm that date up and then publish on the Transparency Hub when we have a final contract value. Although I can come back after we've got a final contract value and let you know how we go.
Just wonder if we've overplayed our hand whether we should just come for sole source and then without a dollar amount in there. Okay.
This has been a back and forth. The need for transparency in publishing when I bring up papers, and then the wishing to keep these kind of values. Talk about contingency as well. I don't generally put a contingency on a contract when I come to council because we don't want to let the market know the contingency I have on a contract. So
may I ask, how did we come up with the figure of $8.2 million?
That figure would have been based on the historical contract value.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions from the committee this morning? Thank you, Mr. White. All right. Moving on to the next part of the matter, any committee members willing to move recommendations A through D? If nobody's willing to move it, then I will request from the floor somebody to propose what we're willing to do with it this morning.
Thank you, Chair. I think several of us would like some further information about the process and why it was conducted in this way.
Yeah, are there any, sorry, I'll need Mr. White to answer. Are there any time constraints on renewal here or any implementation?
I think it's our current one, times that of September.
28th of September. So that gives us the opportunity for the next committee meeting or the council meeting, depending on what the floor wants. I think it's important to understand our options.
I think so, and I'm happy if it goes to the ordinary council meeting or the next committee meeting, either one.
If it could be ordinary council so that we don't delay, please.
Thank you,
Chair. Thank you, Chair.
Chief Executive Officer. We will take your thoughts into consideration. So I will happily move then that this matter be referred to the next council ordinary meeting on the 30th of June 2022. Seconded by Councillor Kunzelman. Do we need to request any information or is that implied from the discussion this morning? Chief Executive Officer.
Probably a matter for the committee, Chair, but I believe I understand the intent of the questions, and our Acting GM Corporate Services is nodding furiously. So yes, thank you. We have what we need, if you're satisfied with that.
I'm satisfied with that, but you know, you never know. Sometimes people like to use very discreet language. All right, well, I'll put that matter to the vote. Those in favour? That's unanimous and carried. Item 5 today is another procurement matter for Microsoft Enterprise Licensing, a 3-year agreement. Any questions for the relevant officer this morning?
Yes.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll call on Mr. White again.
Richard White, Manager of Procurement.
Thank you, Mr. Bowler. My question is, so how do we know that this is the best value for money for the people of Ipswich?
This is, again, price based on the previous. We are looking at, and I can come back again, but this one's obviously a tied up period in August. We are currently negotiating the price on this, and it's based on, and I've got a very quick spiel here from my ICT category manager.
May I ask, how many licences are we looking at?
I don't have the number, and I'm pitching towards the CIO. If we have it off the top of, we'll have to come back with that number.
I'm just trying to work out how much it is per person.
We've gone with initial quote value, but it's likely that we will see negotiated savings on this. However, we have to cover obviously 3 years with possible true-ups under the contract, allowing for council growth, and also we'll have project resources who require licensing during that time. So the price, again, it's based on indicative pricing, and then in the process of negotiating, trying to get out ahead of our timeframe, so we're not giving council only a few weeks to decide on contracts before they expire.
Thank you, Mr. White.
Thank you, Mr. White. So I'll just, allude here that if the committee's requiring more information, it says here that this would commence on the 1st of August. So subject to some commentary from the floor on how to proceed would be welcomed.
I guess I can't move or second it, and that's when we would normally go into discussion. I guess my concern was I just wanting to know how we're getting the best value for money, and I think maybe I'd like to discuss with the CEO whether we can go forth saying we approve doing sole source, maybe in a confidential attachment to say how much we think it's going to cost, because I think we've just played our hand to the market, and I'm concerned that we won't be getting the best negotiated outcome, but I could be overreacting. So I just wanting to know how we can improve our process to get the best deal possible for the people of Ipswich.
Through you, Chair, if I may, just the difference with this matter is that a market evaluation was taken to action through an RFI, a request for information,
Yep.
to 4 Microsoft resellers in December 2021, and 3 responses were received. So those responses have been assessed, and hence the recommendation to progress with the Data 3 limited supplier, as it is considered to offer the best value for money. So if the request for information is in terms of the number of licences, we can come back with that fairly swiftly, I would have thought.
Okay.
But please, any further information you require, we're happy to action.
Yeah, I guess I've been on a rough, looking at probably 1,100 licences, about $1,400 per person per year for the licence is what I was sort of roughly calculating it. But yeah, this one did go to the market. And I guess, is this considered the best price that we could get?
It is at this point in time, yes, subject to final negotiations. It's the quote that offered the best value for money, as has been assessed.
Okay.
But we can certainly swiftly come back with the number of licence we're estimating.
Yep. It's probably not material to the decision, but thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, in case I'm happy to move it.
All right. Recommendations A through D.
C.
On this matter, no D on this one. Bit different. Seconded by Councillor Kunzelman. Any discussion this morning? There being no discussion, I'll put the matter to the vote. Those in favour? That's unanimous and carried. Item 6 this morning is another procurement matter regarding Waste Services Commercial Management System. Any questions of the relevant officer? Mayor Harding has some questions, Mr. White.
Richard White, Manager of Procurement.
Through the chair, thank you, Mr. White. I see this one is again, we're going to the current supplier.
Yes.
And in the report, it says there's only one supplier. Can you explain to me how the market research was arrived at, that this was basically the only option that we had?
Yeah. So in March 2019, Council tested the market in relation to software, and through means of an open tender. So again, the best approach to identifying and assessing value for money, direct and open to the market. No other suitable software was found, and we continued with our current packaging of what we've bought here, the waste, whatever it's called.
So you're saying back in
Waste Edge.
2019, only one supplier?
Yes, and then since then that supplier has been bought out. This is relation to essentially upgrading from their current product to their SaaS product, and getting ahead of, again, trying to get ahead of the contract rollover here, and we're doing that before they essentially cut off services on this existing product that we're on, and we're asking to sole source directly to their newest edition, essentially.
How does this price compare to 2019?
I would have to go back and get that figure for you. Take that on notice.
Okay.
Can we just make sure that it's recorded as a question on notice?
Yep. It may be in the attachments, but I haven't got that off the top of my head.
May I ask, if council did agree to these recommendations, will the organisation be coming back to us once the final negotiated price is done, or they would just be taking this as authority to proceed if the contract was underneath that dollar amount?
Correct. So if it was under that dollar figure, we could execute the contract through the CEO, although at this value, it would be well within the GM IED delegations.
Thank you.
Any further questions?
No, thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. White. All right, this matter has 3 recommendations. The question on notice will come back to us before the ordinary council meeting. So again, just seeking from the floor, is anybody willing to move A through C? Moved by Councillor Jonick, seconded by Councillor Kunzelman. Any discussion this morning? There being no discussion, I'll put the matter to the vote. Those in favour? We've got Councillor Jonik, Councillor Doyle, Councillor Milligan, Councillor Kunzelman and myself, Councillor Madsen. Those against? Mayor Harding. The recommendations are carried. We'll move on to our next item today. We have item 8, disposal of council freehold land access restriction strip located at lots 67 and 68, unnamed road, Pine Mountain. Do any committee members have questions this morning on this matter? Mayor Harding.
Good morning, Alicia Reek, Senior Property Officer, Acquisitions and Disposals.
Thank you. Yes, do you mind going into some, because there's quite a bit of land that's looking at the subterranean easements here. Sorry, it's just here. Do you mind just sort of going through why this is happening and why this is coming to us?
I just want to seek clarification. We're talking about the subterranean one, not the access restriction strip one. Is that right? There was just reference to the access restriction strip
the
when
Eastern
I walked
Heights.
up. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Sorry, the subterranean
Yes.
easement at Eastern Heights, yes.
Sorry. Yeah, so this is something that's sort of with the historic operations of Ipswich, with our mining town as such. So there's subterranean land that exists for a mining purpose, and this easement is an easement that encumbers the surface lots, which it's 221 lots that have an easement registered over their title for an access easement to this subterranean land. So what happens is basically when people are wanting to do any sort of development application or permit to construct a shed or pool, they're having to seek a certain consent from council. So we're just wanting to remove that easement so that we can surrender it, and then there's none of that on a case-by-case basis. It's just removed from their title.
Thank you. How many more blocks of, how many more easements do we have in our city? Is this one of many, or?
That would be a really, that's an interesting question, and it is possible that they do exist, but there is a lot of subterranean land.
Yeah.
It's usually described with the plan will suggest that to the depth of, and there's another lot existing under these parcels. So this is an interesting one in the fact that it's got that easement for access purposes to the subterranean land. So unfortunately I can't clarify if there's similar situations to this, but they probably would pop up with customer inquiries when they've got to seek this consent.
Thank you, Ms. Reid. Thank you.
Any further questions this morning? All right, thank you. Just to clarify, I actually read out the title for the next one, the Pine Mountain Road matter. This is the Eastern Heights one. Paper is quite cumbersome. I'll make sure to shred this copy of the agenda as soon as the meeting is over. So just to clarify there that we're on item 7. Any committee members willing to move recommendations A through C? Moved by Mayor Harding, seconded by Councillor Milligan. Any discussion this morning?
Yeah, thank
Councillor
you,
Doyle.
Chair. I would just like to say that I disagree with your comments that it was cumbersome. From a legal eagle's point of view, fascinating. I so loved the reading of this particular report. Okay, Chair. And I just make a general comment that, in line with the Mayor's question around how many properties throughout Ipswich are impacted by these types of easements, I know there are a lot, and there's a lot of flow-on effects. So not only for council, that administrative burden of having to provide consents from council to property owners, but also, when properties are being sold, there's an easement registered on the title. So that always raises flags. We here in Ipswich know that there's a lot, and it's usually related to historic mining issues, but not everyone is aware of that. So,
Chair, I think you probably enjoyed the age of the documents, yes. Councillor Doyle, and just seeing, obviously they're in the confidential documents, but some of the properties, obviously they've there's had to be some exceptions, you know, from 1941. You can see certain properties have had to get continual approvals.
Yeah, thank you. And you know, another example of a consequence, well, a flow-on effect, growing up, our family home of over 30 years in Basin Pocket, my parents received a cheque in the mail because of one of these subterranean easements, and when the property flooded and the underground shaft flooded, they were entitled to some type of compensation. So there's lots of nuances around these things. Like I said, fascinating for some.
Thank you, Councillor Doyle. Any further discussion this morning on item 7? There being no further discussion, I'll put the matter to the vote. Those in favour? That's unanimous and carried. Item 8 today is another disposal of council land, but a different one nonetheless. The previously announced lots 67 and 68 unnamed road, Pine Mountain. Any questions of the relevant officer on this matter? Mayor Harding.
Good morning, Alicia Reek, Senior Property Officer, Acquisitions and Disposals.
Thank you, Ms. Rick. And through the chair, what are the benefits to the residents of Ipswich of approving this?
With this particular one, it's going to be an ultimate benefit to the adjoining owners because they will, an access restriction strip is something that was a planning instrument from years ago where it helped make sure that they weren't accessing the side of their property through this road reserve. With this particular circumstance, it's a road that's not going to be utilised by Ipswich City Council in the future, and with that, owners adjoining to that road can make representations to the state to close it, but the access restriction strip needs to be removed. So as far as other residents in the area, not so much because it's not a road that will be used.
Thank you. And have the landowners lodged this application?
Yeah, so once the access restriction strip is removed, they'll be able to formally apply to Department of Resources and close that area of road and amalgamate it into their properties.
And how do we know that we won't ever need this as a road reserve?
There was internal consultation with our transport planners and other areas of council to ensure that everyone's on the same page.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Reek. Thank you, Chair.
Any further questions this morning? Thank you. Again, I'll seek a mover from the floor for recommendations A through C. Councillor Milligan, seconded by Councillor Doyle. Any discussion on this matter this morning? There being no discussion, I'll put the matter to the vote. Those in favour? That's unanimous and carried. Item 9 today is the repeal of previous council decision for renewal of lease, Kiosk 1, Carolee Shopping Village, 39 Junction Road, Chua. Any questions of the relevant officers on this matter this morning? Mayor Harding.
Carrie Parrott, Acting Property Services Manager.
Thank you, Ms. President. And through the Chair, my reading of this is that this is only coming back to us because it's timed out. Is that correct?
Yes,
Or-
that's
so
correct.
Nothing else has changed?
No.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. President. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Parrott. I'll seek a mover for recommendation on A and B this morning. Moved by Councillor Doyle, seconded by Councillor Milligan. Any further discussion? All right, we'll put the matter to the vote. Those in favour? That's unanimous and carried. Our next item is the iVolve project quarterly status update. Any questions of the relevant officer this morning? Mayor Harding.
Good morning, Sylvia Swalling, Chief Information Officer.
Thank you, CIO. And through the Chair, One thing I'll point out, I think on page 158, may I ask just in future that it's a bit bigger? I had to get a microscope out, I think, to read the report. That would be great. Thank you very much for accurately recording this project. Obviously, it's a project that we're watching quite closely because it's very important that we have an ERP system that's rolled out and de-risked. Just after your views on how the project is going and progressing.
We've had a significant change in the program of work, and that's been as we have assessed the state of issue and risk that we're currently having with our finance and procurement solution, which is the Oracle product. An assurance report was conducted, and that gave us the opportunity to actually reassess the assumptions that were underpinning the program design. And at that time, we also brought into consideration the risks that council were currently having in that solution. And was it appropriate for us to continue on the path that we were, or did it actually require a remediation, which would then require a change to the program? So further risk analysis was done and various options were modelled and presented to the executive leadership team for consideration and also then socialised with councillors. And the decision was made that our immediate risk required a remediation response. And this then has changed both the design and the approach for iEvolve. What those design impacts are currently being articulated through change requests, but it's going to see a broader expression of interest approach, and that will occur concurrently with us remediating our existing risks to our main solution. So we're sort of delivering that as a substantive response to tranche 1, which was always considered the finance and procurement modules.
So in the report on page 150, it talks about the overall dashboard being red and with budget and milestones, yet the key project controls report is amber and green. Is there a reason for a difference in the two?
Some of these comes down to when the status report or the update report was actually drafted and when the cover report was created.
Okay, so it's progressed for them. Okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
and the project has since been re-baselined to show that those timelines have now been rephased for our new approach.
Okay. And the final business case, which I think has moved from July to the 6th of October now, will that be coming back to council or will be briefed, or how will that occur?
The timeframes for the final business case are dependent on the evaluation and decision report for the expression of interest. Mm-hmm. So if the stars align and that all goes perfectly well, we would be seeing that certainly towards the end of the fourth quarter, and yes, that would then come back to council for consideration.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Thank you.
All right, I'll seek a mover from the floor that the report be received in the contents noted. Moved by Mayor Harding, seconded by Councillor Doyle. Any discussion this morning? Mayor?
Probably to yourself, Sue, I just commend the organisation that, noting most organisations don't have ERP implementation people. That's usually something that's contracted in. I want to thank you for taking that strategic approach of bringing that capability into our organisation and taking a very strategic review on making sure that we do have a good approach for our organisation and being able to be agile to change direction when we did receive advice to change that approach. So thank you very much for that.
Any further discussion from the committee? All right, there being no further discussion, I'll put the matter to the vote. Those in favour? That's unanimous and carried. We'll move on to item 11 today, the 2020-21 annual financial statements for controlled entities. Any questions of the relevant officer on these matters? Mayor Harding.
Morning, Mayor and Councillors. Paul Mollenhauer, Acting Chief Financial Officer.
Thank you, Mr Molyneux. Through the chair, when will council stop reporting on these? When are these entities sort of finished and closed and our city can move on?
So for Ipswich City Properties, this will be the last time the report will come for Ipswich City Properties, noting that its report attached here is an unaudited report. It was deregistered prior to the end of financial year, so it didn't need to go through that final wrap-up. The other two entities that are listed here, Ipswich City Enterprises and Ipswich City Enterprises Investments, are dormant. They're not actively trading, but whilst they're still a registered company, we have an obligation to do financial statements for them. Our intent moving forward will be to push them into what we call a members' voluntary liquidation process in the coming financial year, to look to have them wound up so that by the time we get to this time next financial year, you'll get a similar unaudited report for those two entities, and then they're done.
Okay. How much is it costing for us to keep it open?
In operational costs, it's actually very minimal because they're dormant. We have probably perhaps a couple of $1,000s of membership fees for ASIC or ASIC fees to pay. But other than that, there's no ongoing transactional costs. We're not doing any level of monthly reporting. The Treasury team do a monitor of bank accounts to make sure that there's no transactions inadvertently flowing through those accounts. And it's the audit process at the end of year, which is probably more the greatest expense.
Cost? Is that what, a few $1,000s or?
Audit costs are probably in the order of about $5,000 each.
Right, okay. Thank you, Mr Molyneux.
Cheers.
Seek a mover that the report be received and contents noted. Moved by Mayor Harding, seconded by Councillor Doyle. Any discussion this morning from the committee? There being no discussion, I'll put the matter to the vote. Those in favour? That's unanimous and carried. Our last item today is item 12, the revised alcohol consumption and sale in public places policy. Are there any questions of the relevant officer on this matter this morning? There being no questions, I'll seek a mover for the policy, and so recommendation A and B. Councillor Doyle, seconded by Councillor Milligan. Any discussion this morning? There being no discussion, I'll put the matter to the vote. Those in favour? That's unanimous and carried. There's no notices of motion or matters arising. So I will declare the meeting closed at 11:13. The next meeting will commence at 11:23.